Welcome to the Chapter 13 Flipped Classroom. There are three chapters on the executive branch, and the first one is about the president. I apologize, and I want to thank Sam for catching the audio problem on the previous video. So hopefully we can just quickly go through this one more time. This classroom is going to go over the roles of the president, benefits and the qualifications, line of succession, and in class on Friday we had already talked about the election of the president through the Electoral College. If you look at the roles of the president, oftentimes students will get this confused with something we're going to talk about later, the powers of the president. The powers are guaranteed him in the Constitution. We'll talk about that later. The roles of the president are basically the different hats he's going to wear. If you ever look at his daily schedule, he has a very busy daily schedule. He might be in the Situation Room at one time dealing as Commander-in-Chief. Later on, he's going to put on a different hat, maybe going to a party campaign rally. So he's going to be wearing a different hat. Or he's going to be meeting with the cabinet, his chief executive, asking them to execute the law in his vision. So he's wearing a different hat. So the roles of the president would be chief of party. So he's going to be cruising around the country. They're raising money or campaigning for his political party. Another one is chief legislator. Now, in theory, of course, the president is head of the executive branch who executes the legislative branch's laws, but oftentimes the president does have a say in how bills are made. And there's Reagan signing the budget. He's also commander-in-chief. The buck stops here, as Truman once said. He is in full control of the military. He's also chief diplomat. He is steering the United States foreign policy. So he will be meeting with other heads of nations. And finally, he's going to be chief executive. He is going to be executing the laws that the legislative branch has passed. And finally, he's going to be chief of state. He is the one person that is recognizable to the government of the United States. When we look at the qualifications and benefits of the President of the United States, you have to live in the United States for 14 years. Not an issue today. It was back when the Constitution was passed. You have to be a natural-born citizen, born in the United States or one of the territories, and you have to be 35 years old. Some of the benefits are pretty nice. You make $400,000 a year. Having said that, many of the presidents that are president probably would have been making a lot more than that anyway. You get to ride in Air Force One. If you're ever going by O'Hare Airport, take a peek. Sometimes it's there. You get to live in the White House. Beautiful house. Some call it a prison. You get the best medical care. You have Secret Service protection. And you have a nice vacation spot called Camp David. Hundreds of acres large in the mountains of Maryland. It is said to be the only place where the president can walk around without being followed by the Secret Service. Finally, the terms of our president, you serve for 4 years for each term. The 22nd Amendment dictates that you only get 2 terms. Again, easy way to remember, a 22nd Amendment, 2 terms. 22nd, 2 terms. Having said that very quickly, there is a way that you can serve 9.5 years, 9 3/4 years. If you serve out a half of less than half of a portion of a president's term, but we can talk about that later. And then finally, presidential succession. If the president dies, the vice president takes over. Then it switches to the legislative branch, the People's House. Then the Speaker of the House, leader of the House of Representatives, then takes over. If they're unavailable, then it goes to the Senate, where the President pro tempore will take over. And then after that, if they're unavailable, then it switches back to the executive branch where Secretary of State and then Secretary of Treasury will take over. Next is Secretary of Defense. Those are the first three departments made from the government back in 1789. And the rest of the line of succession comes in as the departments came into being. So ultimately, Secretary of Homeland Security will be serving last as of right now. There is talk of trying to put him seventh, I believe, passing along. Finally, the 12th Amendment corrects a problem in the Constitution that they really didn't think of. If you can imagine this, in 1796, the way the Constitution basically works is the electors will vote. The person who has the most votes becomes president. The person who comes in second becomes vice president. For the Federalists in 1796, if you recall on Friday, we talked about the vision that the electors would rarely decide a election because they didn't think that no candidate would ever get a majority, because they thought the South, the North, and the West would run separate candidates and no one would ever get a majority. Well, if you can fathom that, imagine the Federalists in 1796 all chose, through the 13 states, John Adams as president, but they were divided on who were they making their second ballot for vice president. So in essence, the person who came in second was the Democratic candidate, Thomas Jefferson. So you had a split party running the country, president and vice president. So that was unusual. So there was a reason why to change it. And then in 1800, an even drastic problem. Again, we said the person who becomes president has the most votes, vice president second most votes. Well, this is the opposite of 1796. The Democrats were on the same page. Very different from the Federalists in 1796. Every elector that voted Democratic voted for Thomas Jefferson for president, Aaron Burr for vice president. So you had two electoral votes, which basically meant that there was a tie for the top vote getter between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. So if everybody stuck to that plan, you'd always have a tie. So it had to go to the House of Representatives, number of votes. Finally, Thomas Jefferson won. In the end, though, the 12th Amendment fixes that problem, where electors are basically voting for president and vice president separately, so there's never going to be an issue. Finally, the 23rd Amendment, as we talked about on Friday, allows District of Columbia, in theory not a state, of course, 3 electoral college votes in the presidential election, because all states get how many members of the House of Representatives plus 2 senators equals their electoral votes, but District of Columbia is not a state, so the 23rd Amendment allowed them to vote in presidential elections. In essence, that is the flipped classroom for Chapter 13. Again, on Friday we went over the Electoral College. Next class we're going to be looking at the problems, the defects of the Electoral College, plus ways or plans to fix the Electoral College. Thanks for watching.